I can't, but roughly it will be in thousands because I've been in this line of work for almost 40 years, and in the earlier days when I worked in Detroit for County of Wayne, I was very, very busy. I remember that in 1988 I performed approximately 1,200 autopsies that year only. So it was in those days, many years ago. It was 36, 37 years ago now. But things have slowed down, and obviously I moved to a different jurisdiction. But bottom line would be thousands. How many? It's
all right.
10,000, 1,000, 8,000. I can't tell because I don't keep track of that.
That's sufficient. As a forensic pathologist and a neuropathologist, have you testified in any trials?
This is the first this week, but yes, in a direct in person, in local court, district court, circuit court, throughout the state of Michigan and coast to coast, from the East Coast to West Coast and down to Alabama and Louisiana and Florida and wherever I was subpoenaed or requested to come in and to provide the interpretations that may be needed.
All right. Your Honor, I submit at this point that Dr. Dragovich is to be certified as an expert in the fields of neuropathology and forensic pathology.
Mr. Truman, Ms. Acorn, do you wish to engage in voir dire of the proposed expert witness?
No, Your Honor. We accept him as an expert.
All right. Dr. Dragovich is considered an expert in the fields of forensic pathology and neuropathology.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Dr. Dragovich, did you prepare a report for this court in the case of the state of West Virginia versus Natalie Cochran?
Yes, I did, sir.
Okay. I would like to submit this report as an exhibit and whatever defendant's last number is.
It'll be defendant's exhibit number 11, Your Honor.
Thank you.
I didn't remember.
There you go.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Dragovich, because of the wonders of technology, I cannot hand you this report, but do you have a copy of the report you submitted? At the top, it's identified in the top as Oakland County, Michigan, and there's various information there, including your name and Chief of Forensic Pathology. It's dated January 6th of 2025. And do you have that report, which numbers 3 pages?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to ask you questions related to this report. All right?
That's fine.
Okay. I want to set this here so I don't forget it.
Okay.
Now, on page 1 of that report, and if you would, follow along with me. At the bottom, it has a section called Materials Reviewed. Would you please tell this court what materials you reviewed in preparation for this report and your testimony?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Number one would be Heredity General Hospital records regarding Michael Cochran. Number two would be Charleston Area Medical Center records regarding Michael Cochran. Number three would be a report of the postmortem examination, case number WV-2019-3671. Michael Cochran, deceased, issued by Piotr Kubicek, MD, on September 3rd, 2019. Number four would be autopsy photographs. Number five would be report of re-examination and examination of the remains of Michael Cochran, deceased, performed by Dr. Paul S. Zuribe, MD, on July 11th, 2023. And then medical report of Diane R. Krieger, MD, based on record review issued on April 13, 2023.
Do you believe that the totality of those records informs you enough to make an informed decision and to give your opinion and testimony here today in this case?
Yes.
On page 2 of your report,
Yes, sir.
you have a section titled Brief Case Synopsis and Issues to be Addressed. Would you give a brief synopsis of this case as you understand it and the issues you were to address?
Well, this is an unfortunate death of a 38-year-old man who was a bodybuilding enthusiast, and based on the information, took an excessive amount of clomiphene sulfate supplements that he purchased in Mexico. Subsequently developed seizures, and that same day, which was February 6, 2019, as indicated, and lost consciousness or lost his balance and struck his head during a fall at home. Then became.
Let me stop you right there.
Yes, sir.
Did this information about the circumstances come from your review of the medical records?
This was the account provided throughout and matched with other accounts from the records and from the authorities as well, I believe.
Okay.
Because that was the statement provided by the spouse of Mr. Cochran.
All right. Well, what I'm getting at is you have... Strike that. That's sufficient. Thank you. Would you please go on with your synopsis?
He was taken to a local medical center and emergency room, and subsequently where he was documented as suffering from hypoglycemia, and then he was taken to Charleston Area Medical Center for continued treatment, but in the comatose state. And then because of the profound encephalopathy, he was transferred to hospice care and pronounced 5 days later, that is on February 11th of 2019.
What is encephalopathy?
Encephalopathy, in simple translation, means suffering of the brain. And encephalopathy can be caused by various unfavorable factors that may negatively affect the brain function. So it might be lack of oxygen, it might be lack of glucose, might be traumatic encephalopathy where there is interference with adequate blood supply to the brain, or various toxic encephalopathies upon exposure to either poisonous gases or poisonous substances in so many different ways. There may be also endogenous encephalopathies from in a person suffering of urine syndrome.
One moment. What's endogenous? Would you explain that to the jury?
Endogenous coming from within the body, from alien organs from within the body, which generally would happen as a result of liver failure and kidney failure or combination thereof.
Okay.
They can also come from various other endocrinopathies, meaning the diseases of endocrine system, diseases of the gland with internal secretion that control our metabolic functioning day to day in any of our bodies worldwide.
Can you state that encephalopathy has occurred in this case, Mr. Cochran's brain, from a physical examination of that brain?
Well, it would be based not on not so much on inquiry, but the fact that there is disturbance of consciousness, and that was the critical part that was documented throughout. That Mr. Cochran was first of all brought from one hospital in semi-comatose state to another hospital where his unconsciousness.
Okay, so can I interrupt you there for just a moment? So it's a combination of your physical analysis of the body as well as his history, which is contained in the medical records. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, but primarily the fact that there was loss of consciousness and continuously occurring, deepening, and finally being complete, and leading to life support and hospice care.
Can a person have an anatomically normal brain and still have seizures?
Of course, the seizure activity is an abnormal electrical activity, and oftentimes in individuals who have cellular level problems or very localized problems with the brain tissue, there will be creation of abnormal electrical activity without necessarily identifiable focus physically. One examines the brain and does not find any such reasonable substrate, as we call it, or change in the tissue to account for a occurrence of abnormal electrical activity that we refer to as seizure. However, in many other situations, that is possible and that can be clearly identified. So you can go either way depending on each and individual case. Every single individual on this planet is slightly different than anybody else, and one cannot generate some statistical projection about one person vis-a-vis the other person until there is complete examination and a full assessment, a full examination of this person's brain.
Okay, now I have another question at this time. Can a person suffer a brain injury without external signs of injury? For instance, can a person lose consciousness, fall to the ground, and not have an actual observable injury on the outside of their skull?
Yes, that is possible.
Okay. Now, in this case, Mr. Cochran had seizures. That's documented in all the records, correct?
Yes, sir.
From your review of everything in this case, could Mr. Cochran have had seizures due to unknown medications or body enhancement drugs in his system?
Of course, it's possible. Yes, there are quite a few drugs that can create compromised brain function and actually start the abnormal electrical activity.
Okay. You talk about in almost the middle of page 2, you say that there were vague circumstances that triggered the investigation into Mr. Cochran's death, exhumation, and autopsy in September 3rd, 2019, the first autopsy. Could you explain or elaborate on what you mean by the vague circumstances?
Well, there was somehow generated a suspicion that the demise of Mr. Cochran was not what was represented at the time of his demise, and then the investigation was opened up, carried out, and ended up with an exhumation of the remains.
Okay. Now, the first exhumation was done September 3rd of 2019.
Correct.
Mr. Cochran passed away, I believe it was somewhere around February. Sorry, do you remember the date that he passed away?
Yeah, 11th, yes.
Okay, February 11th of 2019, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So the first autopsy was done 7 months after Michael Cochran's death. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this autopsy was done by Dr. Kubicek, who was the West Virginia medical examiner. Did you
Yes, sir.
did you review Dr. Kubicek's report of the autopsy and exhumation?
I did.
Okay. Was Dr. Kubicek's ultimate findings and conclusion that the the autopsy findings themselves were inconclusive, and the cause of death was undetermined, and the manner of death was undeterminable.
Yes, sir.
What is the cause of death?
The cause of death is anatomical finding in the body or on the body that explains why a particular individual died. This may be the finding of an infarct, a finding of a blockage of a major blood vessel or a coronary blood vessel, major bleed in the brain, tumor with metastases that stops the vital function of the body, a wound by firearm, wounds by sharp force, injuries by blunt force like 2x4 used to bash someone's head, etc., etc. So a demonstrable, understandable autopsy finding, anatomical finding within the body or on the body of a particular person.
So, is it your job as a forensic pathologist to look for the anatomical evidence of why someone dies, the cause of death? Is that your function? One of them.
Yes, it is. That's the basic function, and it is in the most statutes throughout the Union. It calls for a forensic pathologist or medical examiner or coroner to establish the cause of death based on such endeavor.
Just as an aside, what exactly is a forensic pathologist?
A forensic pathologist is a public pathologist. Word forensic comes from Latin word for, which is a place of public gathering, and in such way it depicts a forensic pathologist, whether a man or a woman, working in that capacity on behalf of the public and being called upon to interpret any such finding for the benefit of the public, like in a court of law or in the media or any place where such need exists.
So there's some degree of interpretation in this, which is based on your medical knowledge. Wouldn't that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
What is the manner of death? What does that term mean?
Manner of death is how death came upon a person, meaning the physical circumstances combined with those findings on the body or within the body. And there are worldwide 5 categories of manner of death. There's a natural death, where there are causes from within the body that result in someone's death. Then there is homicide, where there is death resulting from a purposeful act of another person first. Then there is a very narrow category of suicide, where death is the result of purposeful act by self and self only. If anyone else is involved, it's a homicide again. Then there is accident as a category of death, where death is the result of untoward effects of someone's act or action, acts of nature, floods, fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, or a person driving a car at the high rate of speed and impacting another vehicle, causing death, or striking a pedestrian somewhere where death results as an untoward effect of death.
Untoward effect of what? You kind of faded out there.
I didn't hear you, sir.
You said an untoward effect of something, and what did you say? You kind of wrote it out there.
Untoward, the unpredictable and untoward effect that cannot be interfered with or something along those lines. So, like I said, these are something for the most part, the result of basically the unwilling or unwanted result of someone's act or action.
Okay. Now,
and there is also a last category that provides the opportunity for forensic pathologists to say that they don't know, and that's the undeterminable manner of death.
so undeterminable means they've looked at everything, they can't come to a conclusive determination of the manner of death, so that's called undeterminable, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you may have covered this in your explanation, but as to manner of death, it's how death comes upon a person, including the physical circumstances surrounding that death. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
I want to concentrate on the term homicide. Okay?
Okay.
Would it be a true statement that in determining homicide, which is one of those categories that talk about the manner of death, that homicide, if that's a forensic pathologist's conclusion, it has to be demonstrated by their findings, not assumed? Would that be a correct statement?
Yes.
And when I say demonstrated, that is the actual physical findings, and that's the only possible conclusion. Would that be true?
Yes, sir.
I believe towards the bottom of your page, you're talking about Michael Cochran's nervous system. Okay? And you talk about, and this information came from Dr. Just a moment. Okay, there we go. That information that you described was from the first autopsy done by Dr. Kubitschek. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Can you summarize or describe your description there, or Dr. Kubitschek's description, in layman's terms, so we can understand it? I'm not sophisticated enough to actually understand all of these terms. Can you dummy it down for me?
We are talking about the brain of Mr. Cochran at the time of autopsy, the first autopsy, after the first exhumation, and the report says that everything is fine, that the hard covering of the brain are intact, and the soft coverings are thin and delicate, and cerebral hemispheres are symmetrical, meaning that the parts of the brain are fine. The description basically is referencing the standard appearance of a normal brain when it is taken out of the cranial wall.
Okay.
However,
I want to ask you specific questions on that. Okay.
yes.
Dr. Kubitschek essentially says that Michael Cochran's brain on autopsy was normal. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I have to disagree with that because this was a decomposed brain. We know it was decomposed brain by the photographs that were provided from that examination.
Okay,
So,
and I want to ask a specific question there.
yes, sir.
A person's brain on autopsy after death, and after 7 months of death and burial, what would you expect that person's brain to be? And by that, does the decomposition affect the brain so it shrinks?
A decomposition means falling apart. The tissue is disintegrating. The tissue is breaking up completely, so the brain itself gets fluidity and falls apart. So it is not the same as when it's freshly removed from a cranial ball, someone that has passed away within hours prior to that or within a couple of days prior to that.
Okay, now I want to ask you a question there. Would a decomposed brain that's falling apart, would that be expected to weigh less than a normal brain?
Well, probably it will, and it's relatively low to mid brain weight. I cannot say specifically on the account of the documented brain weight, but it has the tendency to decrease the actual brain weight and to blur the distinction between the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, which would be the areas to look for any changes in a history like this, in this particular case.
Okay, now, it was documented in the medical records that Michael Cochran had, I'll call it an enlarged brain. Do you recall that?
Yes. Swollen brain.
Swollen. Expanded.
Yes.
Would these results that Michael Cochran's brain appeared essentially normal, even though it had decomposed over 7 months, would that be likely to confirm that he had an enlarged brain or swollen brain prior to death?
Well,
Would it be an indicator? Would it be an indicator?
It's not a situation where you can make an inference from the decomposing brain about something that is being reported, objectively documented by radiographic imaging.
Okay, all right, so you can't really make that determination based just on the post-mortem autopsy. Wouldn't that be correct?
Well, it's not on this post-mortem examination.
That's what I'm getting at. This post-mortem autopsy.
Of course not, because of the inevitable change, the breakdown of tissue throughout the human body over a period of 7 months.
Okay. Is the timeliness of an autopsy important in conducting your medico-legal investigation of someone's death?
Yes, sir. It is of critical importance.
Okay. Would it be a fair statement that in Michael Cochran, his body, which was examined 7 months after death, was too decomposed to rule out important anatomic findings such as infection, pancreatic tumors, and in doing a complete toxicology report? Is that a fair statement? It was too decomposed for those things.
Well, it has to be, the answer has to be slightly modified. Decomposition definitely creates a serious impediment. However, sometimes one can find presence of a tumor because tumor tissue is not sometimes as conducive to falling apart as the rest of the normal tissue. So there are exceptions all the way, but as a general proposition, the decomposition of the remains is a major impediment for adequate diagnostic findings.
And in this particular autopsy of Mr. Cochran, the decomposition made it pretty much impossible to determine if he had such things as pancreatic tumors. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, it would be a fair statement, and I concur there with the conclusion of the doctors that performed the autopsy, the first autopsy at the time.
Okay. And is it true that the pancreas, under normal circumstances, provides the body with insulin?
Yes, it is specific parts of the pancreas. The islet provides the beta cells from the pancreatic islet provide insulin for the general functioning of the body.
Now, if a person has pancreatic tumors, that affects their production of insulin. Is that a true statement?
Well, different tumors of pancreas give different, basically different effects. There may be a tumor of the islet cells, like that we refer to as insulinoma, that can provide large amounts of or abnormal amounts of insulin to the body. Now, there may be cancer of the head of the pancreas that may break down the pancreas completely and cause pancreatic necrosis as well throughout. I mean, there are all kinds of variable possibilities.
I want to concentrate on this particular analysis of Mr. Cochran's pancreas post-mortem. Okay. Now, as a general proposition, insulin controls the body's blood sugar levels. Is that true?
Yes.
Would you explain what hypoglycemia is?
Hypoglycemia means, in translation, low circulating sugar in blood.
Okay. So, some sort of pancreatic disorder in a normal person produces insulin, which controls the blood sugar. And if the blood sugar in the body is low, isn't that a definition of hypoglycemia? H-Y-P-O.
Yes.
And is it also true that when a person dies and decomposition sets in, that the pancreas, being an organ, an internal organ, is one of the first things to decompose?
Well, yes, because pancreas is also a very active exocrine gland producing proteolytic enzymes. And when the circulation stops, those cells break down and those enzymes leach out, and there is rapid autolysis and decomposition of pancreatic tissue.
Okay. And as a general proposition, internal organs, of which the pancreas is one, are the first things to break down or decompose post-mortem.
Well, it depends on the rate of preservation due to the ambient temperatures and other factors. But if you're looking at something that, like in this case, this will be the likely pattern of relatively progressive decomposition of internal organs and tissues primarily, and by that meaning the internal organs, and then ultimately what is left of the skin and subcutaneous tissue, and then the bony skeleton, because that lasts the most.
Okay, so internal organs break down first, then the external skin, things like that, and then last is the skeletal system. Is all of that
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Did Dr. Kubitschek, in his report, mention anything about embalming?
No.
I want to kind of switch gears here and go into a discussion of Dr. Uribe's findings and his report. And you address those at the bottom of page 2. All right?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Uribe's exhuming of Michael's body and his subsequent report is based on the exhumed remains of Michael, which took place July 11, 2023, about 4 years after Michael's death. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the greater or lesser extent of Michael Cochran's body? Was it more decomposed, less decomposed, or the same as when Dr. Kubitschek did his examination?
Well, certainly the decomposition progressed, and one would expect it to progress over so many years. And I believe that good Dr. Uribe said that the samples of decomposed human tissues cannot yield any reliable analysis.
Okay. So there was less to work with, less to examine in terms of toxicology, things like that. Then there was about 3 years before when Dr. Kubitschek did his examination. Was that correct?
Well, I would say that there was nothing good, no good information coming from Dr. Kubitschek, and there could not have been any better coming from the second examination and autopsy that Dr. Uribe did.
Would it be a fair statement that when Dr. Uribe conducted his examination and findings, Michael Cochran's body was too decomposed to rule out important anatomic findings? Again, like infection, pancreatic tumors, and doing a complete toxicology.
Yes.
Dr. Uribe goes through his examinations, his reports, his reliance on other reports, especially Dr. Krieger's. And he comes up with Michael Cochran's death was a homicide. Can you comment on that?
Well,
Let me ask you, first of all, according to your examination of everything, do you believe the evidence obtained through autopsies, reports, etc., would substantiate a finding of homicide as opposed to undetermined or undeterminable? Do you think Dr. Uribe was correct, or do you think Dr. Kubitschek was correct?
I sincerely believe that Dr. Kubitschek was more correct because he did provide the objective assessment and provided also the delimitation of forensic pathologist capacity to make a determination on the basis of nothing. I think Dr. Uribe tried to vary the report with, again, negative findings, completely negative findings from both autopsies, and it made a claim of he might have believed what he said. However, for every such belief, there ought to be a factual evidentiary substantiation.
Okay,
In order to
let me stop you right there. So, any manner and cause of death has to be substantiated by what? What did you say? Objective clinical findings, correct?
Anatomical findings.
Okay.
Because we're talking of the autopsies here. So,
All right.
objective, demonstrable anatomical findings that are tangible and understandable to everyone. leaving no doubt.
Do you believe that Dr. Uribe's opinion that the manner and cause of death are substantiated and resulted in a homicide, do you believe those findings, those ultimate findings in Dr. Uribe's report are based more on assumptions than the objective findings that you talked about?
I believe that there are no objective findings to substantiate Dr. Uribe's determination. His opinion is an attempt to bridge the gap of the unknown, and that bridge has to be created properly so that there is complete responsible understanding of everyone that is to use such a report.
Is Dr. Uribe's report and opinion based on acceptable anatomic and toxicological findings?
No.
So it would be your statement that Dr. Uribe's findings as to Michael's death being a homicide, quote unquote, was not based on actual anatomic and toxicologic findings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In the middle of the page, you discuss Dr. Krieger's report. And her investigation, reasoning, etc., resulted in her finding that Michael Cochran's hypoglycemia, in her opinion, was due to insulin administration, and she classifies that as a strong possibility. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Does the basic medico-legal requirements, do they require accurate determinations of the cause and manner of death that are not based on a definite maybe, as Dr. Krieger states, but rather on a threshold beyond reasonable doubt? Isn't that the correct standard in this report?
Well, it is, because we're talking about death investigation, and also the discrepancy is, as I pointed out, Dr. Krieger is a phenomenal clinician, but Dr. Krieger is not burdened by the duty to define the cause and the manner of death. So the option that she provided is, in all fairness, a good suggestion for furthering the investigation, but the buck stops with forensic pathology, and the person has to provide to the public textual evidence as far as the cause of death and textual evidence about the manner of death. Because the administration of insulin being a strong possibility can come as a result of self-administration, administration by someone else, and then administration by self for the purpose of other things like bodybuilding and other combination of various substances, and resulting in accidental outcomes.
And her report doesn't include who might have injected this insulin, when it occurred, or how it occurred. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, it's a fair statement, but we have to understand that Dr. Krieger is not in the business of examining dead bodies.
Okay. on page 3, there's a paragraph that begins, when classifying the manner of death as a homicide, you state one has a professional obligation to substantiate that determination by reasonable, tangible evidence as someone's purposeful act. Would you explain the rest of that paragraph and your findings?
Well, there has to be evidence about anything, and then that evidence has to be interpreted in a reasonable manner for everyone to understand. For example, it's very simple to say, well, gunshot wounds was the cause of death, and someone discharging purposefully, obviously, that's a purposeful act, the firearm caused it. Then you have a reasonable conclusion of the homicide and a reasonable demonstrable evidence. If someone takes a 2x4 and dashes someone's head and they die, then you have blunt force head trauma caused by 2x4 as obviously a demonstrable purposeful act because someone bashed someone's head. Or if someone had a knife and stabbed someone, thrusted the knife into someone's body once or multiple times, that's a purposeful act. If the individual dies of bleeding caused by that sharp force injury, it's very simple and demonstrable. But in a case like this, there is no information about all those critical circumstances. And one cannot make a certainty about the claim that there was injection, was it self-injection on to render someone dead, or self-injection to render someone more powerful, build up the greater muscle, or something like that, which first would be a suicide, second would be an accident, or injection by someone else, about what we don't have any evidence that would be a homicide. And if we have to be certain about that before we issue a reasonable, congruent forensic opinion. And forensic opinion is a critical document that can provide the basis for further legal action or for no further legal action.
So in summary, do you believe Dr. Uribe's conclusion that Michael Cochran's death was a homicide is the correct conclusion?
If it cannot be substantiated, and he could not substantiate it by physical evidence, then it's not correct. And it is under a grave degree of doubt.
Okay. So, you agree with Dr. Kubitschek that the correct findings and conclusion is that the cause and manner of Michael Cochran's death is undetermined and undeterminable. Would that be a fair statement?
At this point, yes. And at the point of exhumation performed 7 months later, as they did at the time. I don't know what the results might have been had the autopsy been performed a day or two after his demise.
But as we sit here today, after reviewing everything, do you believe Michael Cochran's death was the manner and cause were undetermined and undeterminable?
Yes, sir.
Just as an aside, now your report is coming about 5 years after Michael Cochran's death. Would it have made any difference or been any benefit to exhume Michael Cochran's body a third time after all this passage of time so that you could personally conduct an autopsy? Would that have been of any benefit at all?
If I believed such a thing, I would have brought it up a long time ago whenever you called me to ask me to look at this case. But I don't think that that would be just a waste of resources for no good purpose, no valid purpose.
So that wouldn't change any of your findings that you've testified to today. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Have all of your findings and the testimony you've given here today, do they meet the standard of others in your profession?
I firmly believe so.
They're to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
If there were questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take our mid-morning break at this time. Members of the jury will break for 10 or 15 minutes. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. You may go with the bailiff to your jury room.
Your Honor, I probably should have done this before the jury left, but I did not actually move for the admission of Dr. Dragovich's report. I would like to move for its submission at this time.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. Defendant's number 11 will be admitted into evidence. Doctor, we're taking a 10-minute break, and you're welcome to take a break too and to wander away from the camera. Just be back, if you would, in 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
I will do that. Thank you.
Are there any matters that we need to discuss out of the presence of the jury?
Nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Anything from the
Your
state?
Honor. Excuse me, nothing from the state, Your Honor.
All right. Bring in the jury. You're still with us, Dr. Dragovich?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Hold on to this. We'll discuss it after.
Very well. We continue now with cross-examination from the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Dragovic, can you see me and hear me okay?
I can hear you,
Okay.
sir.
In your report, you stated that Michael took an excessive amount of enclomiphene citrate. Is that right?
I couldn't hear this part. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay. In your report, you stated that Michael Cochran took an excessive amount of enclomiphene citrate. Is that correct?
yes.
Where did that information come from?
From the materials that I reviewed. I believe that was the account that was provided by his spouse.
Okay. Were you aware that that substance was tested by the FBI?
Again, it's something I've learned. Was I aware of what?
That substance had been tested by the FBI?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. That hasn't been established yet. There's no reference to what substance, how it was achieved, anything about the specifics.
Your Honor, that has been established. It has been brought into evidence already with both of the FBI gentlemen that testified here. And you heard Lieutenant Bledsoe testify that he received that bottle from Donna Bolt, who advised that she received it from the defendant.
Objections overruled. Pose the question again so that the witness can hear.
Dr. Dragovic, were you aware that the bottle of enclomiphene citrate provided by the defendant was tested by the FBI?
No.
So you were not aware that that bottle was actually found to contain letrozole and not enclomiphene citrate?
No. Yes,
I'm-
that's correct. That's correct. I do not know. No.
In
May we
your
approach the bench, Your Honor?
All right. All right, let's continue now, please, Ms. Acorn.
Dr. Dragovic, in your review of the records, did you see any evidence that indicated letrozole or even enclomiphene citrate overdose or usage?
Not that I remember. No, ma'am.
And where did you get the information that Michael had a seizure?
From the hospital, right?
Do you know where that initially came from in your review of the records?
Well, it would be also from the account that the spouse provided at the time of the admission.
And were you aware of any seizures being observed in the hospital setting?
It seems to me that there were some, but I don't remember specifically every page from the medical records, ma'am.
That's okay, I understand it was a lot of records. Did anything in the medical records substantiate that Michael had a seizure that you recall?
Again, I don't have the materials in front of me, so I can't recall specifically. There was multiplied reference of encephalopathy, but it seems to me that there were references to seizures, either as historical, being presented at the time, or happening there. But I cannot. It's all blurred now in my mind. I'm sorry.
Okay. In your report, you stated that there was evidence that Michael had a head injury. Is that right?
Yes, that was also from the account upon arrival to the hospital.
Was there any evidence that you recall in the actual medical records that indicate that a traumatic head injury had occurred?
No, that was not addressed in the medical record.
And in your report, you also stated that the defendant was the one who took the deceased to the hospital. Would it surprise you to know that that was not accurate based on the testimony we've heard?
I lost the couple of words there. You got blurred. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it?
Sure. In your report, you stated that the defendant was actually the one who took Michael Cochran to the hospital. Do you recall that? I think we might be having some connectivity issues, Judge.
Are you having difficulty hearing the question, Doctor?
No. I'm looking at the at my second page there, and yes, that was my impression that Natalie Cochran brought him to Raleigh General Hospital, emergency room.
Would it surprise you to know, Doctor, that based on the evidence we've received, the defendant actually watched for 7 to 8 hours and a friend actually transported him to the hospital later that day?
That may be the case. I mean, I was not there. I only put what I read was the information I had in order to kind of gain what was happening at a time.
We'll go back into the medical records. Your report indicates that Mr. Cochran's initial blood glucose at Raleigh General was 76, followed by a next reading of 24. Is that right?
Yes.
However, the evidence actually indicates that the initial blood glucose on arrival was 21. So where in the records did you locate that information?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I know for the fact that there were references to low blood glucose. And what particular level was at the time of particular hospital admission, I cannot recall now.
Doctor, did you review the MRI of Michael Cochran's brain that was obtained at CAMC on 2/8 of 19?
No, but I read the report and there was evidence of encephalopathy there.
In that report, isn't it true that the diagnosis was actually diffuse hypoglycemic encephalopathy?
Yes, that was written in, yes.
And what does that indicate to you, Doctor?
I'm sorry?
What does that indicate to you, that diagnosis?
The diagnosis indicates that there is a hypoglycemic encephalopathy, and that's the point of organization of trying to treat the condition and also to find out why and how this encephalopathy occurred.
Doctor, in your professional opinion, is a blood glucose of 21 compatible with life?
It may or may not be, depending on how fast one reacts to correcting its level of circulating glucose.
And just very briefly, was it your testimony that, just so I understand, that tumor tissue would decompose more slowly than normal organ tissue?
Well, certain tumor tissues that are so-called solid tumors in certain tissues and organs of the body may be undergoing slower decomposition because they're harder than the surrounding quote-unquote normal tissue. So that can happen. And I've seen that in my practice pretty regularly. I've seen extremely decomposed body of an individual falling apart, and yet tumor nodules sticking out because they decompose slowly. It depends on the nature of the tumor.
Now, Dr. Uribe and Dr. Krieger were not given the benefit of reviewing one another's reports prior to creating their reports, but you were able to review both of their reports in creating yours. Is that right?
Yes.
And you were hired by the defense, is that correct?
I was contacted by defense. That's correct, yes, and they asked me to...
It's not a trick question, doctor, I promise. I'm not trying to trip you up in any way. Were you compensated for generating a report in this matter, or will you be?
No, I was not. I am certainly not compensated for the time here because this is my taxpayer time, and my government will send a bill to the lawyers for today. But I think I had about 14 to 16 hours of time put in this, so that was obviously my work after hours. So I will bill for that at my government rate, which is $250 per hour.
Now, when you were creating the report that you generated in this matter, did you initially provide defense counsel with a draft report?
I believe I sent a draft to see if there was anything else that needed to be added to it.
And did you make changes to your report based on commentary that you received?
Your Honor, please note an ongoing objection to this line of questioning.
Very well. It will be preserved.
I am not sure that I made much in a way, some typo errors because my secretary made some typographic errors, but there might have been something added. I will have to look back and try to compare that and give you the exact answer. But substantial changes, no, of course not.
Is it true that you were asked to go into more detail as to how Drs. Uribe and Dr. Krieger were wrong in that draft report?
No, let me explain something. I don't believe that I ever said anything about Dr. I don't want to butcher her name. Krieger. Dr. Krieger's report is clinically accurate report. I have no arguments with that report. Well, I have no arguments with Dr. Uribe except for his opinion. If Dr. Uribe, who is my colleague, presented any tangible evidence, I would have not have any opposing opinion. But you know, there wasn't anything, and a forensic pathologist is there to interpret evidence. If there is no evidence, there is nothing to interpret, man.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like this to be marked as the state's next exhibit.
It will be State's Exhibit number 32, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I would also move for the admission of States 32.
.32 is the draft.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Any further objections?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a moment. I object to the admission of this exhibit.
All right. I'll admit it over the defense objections, and I'll preserve the defendant's objections.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Dragovich, in your professional opinion, what killed Michael Cochran?
I don't know.
So you don't believe that the profound hypoglycemia or the swelling on his brain caused by the hypoglycemia contributed to his death in any way?
I'm going to object to the form of that question. There's no evidence that his hypoglycemia caused the swelling of his brain. That's a mischaracterization of the evidence.
Your Honor, the diagnosis on that MRI is diffuse hypoglycemic encephalopathy.
I'll overrule the objection. You may continue. Ask the question again, Ms. Akron.
Dr. Dragovich, the question was, you do not believe that the decedent's profound hypoglycemia or the significant swelling on his brain caused by that hypoglycemia led to his death?
I would think that's one of the components, but why and how it happened and what the approximate causes are have not been defined whatsoever. So the autopsy did not reveal anything along the line, and it did not show that on brain examination that there was anything but decomposition changes according to the autopsy report.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I have no further questions.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Redirect, Mr. Selden.
Yes, Your Honor. Can I have just a moment?
Sure.
Your Honor, procedurally, I believe that I would like a continuing objection to the last state's exhibit, the alleged draft report. And I believe that there were questions as to whether Dr. Dragovich had received it, what information was exchanged, and Dr. Dragovich, at this point, has not seen this particular exhibit as entered by the state. I believe procedurally he would have to see this exhibit before we proceed further on it.
Well, he referenced it in his testimony, and I've given you a running objection. I've preserved your exceptions, and I'll continue to do so.
All right, first of all, I would like to get the state's last exhibit.
All right, it should be up here with the clerk.
Dr. Dragovich, I'm going to ask you some questions on this last state's exhibit, which is stamped draft on it. Okay?
Okay.
And I admit that I prepared this, or you prepared this draft report. I received it, and I made some notations on it. Given that, I'm going to go through these alleged changes. I circled your initial submission date of December 12th of 2024, and I asked you to change the date to January 6th of 2025 because that's when you submitted your final version of this report. Would you remember that, or does that seem correct to you?
Yeah, that seems correct, yes.
Okay. On the second page of this draft report, I circled a date that you had listed as February 16th, 2019, as the date when Michael Cochran's seizures first started around noon. I corrected that because that was an incorrect date. I notated that the correct date was not February 16th, but February 6th of 2019. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that was a typographic error on the part of my typist here.
Okay.
They're trying to type up a load of reports daily, and these things happen. So anything that's wrong tends to be corrected.
Okay. And I circled the word ALL and pointed out that was a typographical error. It should be FALL for fall, not all. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In one line, you're talking about some information that was relayed. You put your client, and I circled that and asked you to clarify it to Natalie Cochran. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. In the second paragraph on that page, I circled a representation in that report that Michael Cochran's suspicious circumstances of his death triggered an investigation that resulted in an exhumation and an autopsy, and you had 8 months. I corrected that to 7 months. Was that correction proper?
Yes, sir.
On the last page, in the third paragraph, you end that paragraph with the word infant. I circled that and put a notation to admit it. Michael Cochran was not an infant. Is that correct?
Yes, I was puzzled by that word, but I didn't want to go back to my secretary and criticize her for putting a word that didn't belong. But at the end of the sentence, I don't know, maybe she was typing several reports simultaneously, or who knows.
Okay, and that correction, you said it was because your secretary maybe was in a hurry, whatever. That doesn't change the substance of your report at all, does it?
No, those are the typographic errors. They are, I suppose, inevitable when one does the work. Only people that don't do anything do not make any mistakes. Mistakes tend to be corrected. That's it.
Okay. And in the next to the last paragraph, you're talking about Dr. Krieger and Dr. Uribe's mischaracterization, or their findings are not credible or well-reasoned. I simply made a notation in that paragraph and I asked, can you go into more detail as to how Doctors Uribe and Krieger are wrong. You did make that representation in your report earlier, did you not?
I did.
Okay, so am I asking you to change your report? Am I asking you to do anything that would affect your conclusions?
No, sir.
As to your eventual final report, do any of these changes affect your conclusions, the validity, anything in your reasoning?
Absolutely not, sir.
All right.
You were not present when there was witness testimony or Drs. Uribe and Dr. Krieger gave their testimony. You didn't hear any of that testimony, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. There were some questions directed about the enclophamine vial. I submit that that enclophamine vial was given to the FBI by Michael Cochran's mother, Donna. Does that information change anything in your report or cause you any concern about your conclusions?
No, sir.
And it's true, is it not, that Michael Cochran's medical records contain previous seizures that occurred in October 31st through the first week or two in November. That's documented in the medical records, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And I believe there was some mischaracterization about Natalie Cochran driving Michael to the hospital and some misrepresentations about that. The testimony.
Back to characterizing the prosecution's questions as mischaracterization and misrepresentation.
Sustained.
The previous testimony that in this case shows that although Natalie Cochran herself didn't drive the car to the hospital, she was in the car with Michael, with other people, when Michael was taken to the hospital. Would that information change anything in your report and your conclusions at all?
No, sir.
One moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Drakovich, there were some questions by the prosecution about who hired you, who's paying your bills, etc. Would it interest you to know that Natalie Cochran's representation is court-appointed and the state of West Virginia would be paying any of your billings? Do you understand that?
I did not know the particulars. There is no difference whatsoever. As I said, in criminal cases, I apply for my time after hours, my government rate. My government rate is $2.50 per hour, and for this testimony, you'll be getting an invoice from my government for these several hours, and for the rest of the hours, I will be sending you the invoice for that same, based on that same rate.
Would any of the questions on cross-examination change your conclusion that the cause and manner of Michael Cochran's death is undetermined and undeterminable?
No, sir.
And in answer to the prosecutor's question, what killed Michael Cochran, you simply stated you don't know, and all of that reasoning is in your report. Is that correct?
That is correct. And consequences are also correct in the medical records and in the radiographic imaging. But the cause and the manner are not and cannot be defined on the basis of that.
I have no more questions.
Anything further, Ms. Acorn?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any reason to hold Dr. Dragovich?
Not on behalf of the state, Your Honor.
Not.
Thank you very much, Doctor. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, come up, please. Members of the jury, we're going to take a little bit of an early lunch break. If all goes well, your pizza will arrive a little bit before noon, so you'll have a few minutes to get ready for it. And this will not be cheap pizza. This will be top-of-the-line pizza from Pasquale's for your enjoyment. And there will be several types of pizzas to accommodate your various tastes. So it will be along, and we will have the bailiff deliver it to you in your jury room as soon as it arrives. Just be patient if you would. We'll start up at maybe 15 till 1, and that'll give us some time to relax for lunch. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else, and you may go with the bailiff to your jury room. right, are there any further matters that we need to take up at this time out of the presence of the jury?
Nothing on behalf of the state, Your Honor.
Nothing on behalf of the defense, Your Honor.
All right, we'll start back up at 15 to 1.